If you've ever been clueless about who the most evil people in history are, then get your shock absorbers ready, as we show you in this video the 15 most evil people in history with dreadful stories that hardly make it to the public. Number 15. Jamie Osuna. Seeing the frightening and dangerous Jamie Osuna ranked 15th on this list should make you know how deadly a list this is. Known as the man with 1,000 faces, he isn't just horrifying due to his crazy criminal records, but also due to the hideous tattoos covering his face, including a Joker smile and a pentagram. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the 2011 killing of 37-year-old Yvette Peña in a Californian hotel. The hotel, said to be famous for illicit activities, was Peña's residence for a while due to some challenges. After 6 years of denial, Osuna confessed to being guilty of murdering Peña in 2017. In an interview with a female reporter, Olivia Lavoie said, "I did sadistically, premeditatively, and deliberately tortured and killed her." When asked why, he responded, I seen an opportunity. I didn't know her. I didn't know her. I met her. I was introduced to her. I met her like one time, and I came back the next night, and I seen an opportunity." With no remorse, he boasted of killing Peña the way he did so he could have lasting memories of her. On March 28, 2017, he pled guilty to killing Peña and got the death penalty for doing so. At trials, he openly mocked members of Peña's family by smiling and waving at them. In 2019, after 2 years of not having a cellmate, Osuna was given a new cellmate, Romero. 44-year-old Romero was just arriving from Mule Creek State Prison, having spent 27 years and was nearing parole eligibility. In the early hours of March 9, 2019, Osuna tortured and killed Romero, cutting out and slicing his body parts. With blood, he wrote on the wall, "Ha ha ha," and "a man with 1,000 faces." This wasn't Osuna's first attack on an inmate in prison, as he was said to have found his way into another inmate's cell, slashing and stabbing his face, which resulted in 67 stitches. A judge ruled out that Osuna is not competent to stand trial for Romero's death. He has then been transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison Psychiatric Inpatient Program and was diagnosed with unspecified schizophrenia spectrum, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Number 14. The Alphabet Killer. While the 26 letters of the English alphabet are known by children, everyone, and even you, the Alphabet Killer remains unidentified by anyone but himself. The killer was at the center of 3 child murder cases in Rochester, New York between 1971 and 1973. The similar circumstances surrounding the death of the 3 victims made the public attribute all cases to the same killer. All 3 victims of the Alphabet Killer were short girls aged 10 or 11 years who had disappeared from Rochester in the early afternoon on days of light or heavy rain, and whose bodies were later discovered within nearby towns. Sadly, all 3 victims were sexually assaulted and strangled to death before their fully or partially clothed bodies were discarded close to an expressway from a car. Ultimately, and why the killer is known as the Alphabet Killer, is the fact that each of the girls had a surname beginning with the same letter as that of her first name. They were Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowitz, and Michelle Mainza. Furthermore, their bodies were discarded in a town or a village near Rochester with a name beginning with the same letter as the victim's name. The police pursued the case with intense interest and investigation and promised rewards for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the murderer. Guillermina Colon, the mother of one of the victims, said in an interview, "If I could die knowing who killed my Carmencita, I could die more peacefully than I have lived. It is the only thing I want in my life." Although so much efforts were made, none resulted in the apprehension and conviction of the Alphabet Killer. Number 13. The River City Ripper. Now we show you an even worse killer. Despite being the most recent on the list and operating in such a technologically advanced stage as ours, this serial killer has used no sophisticated weapon but a knife. Yes, you heard me, not a drone or machine gun, but a knife. He killed 3 individuals and wounded 1 more between 2020 and 2021 in Little Rock, Arkansas. The surviving victim reported that the killer appeared to be young, black, slenderly built, and over 6 feet tall. A notable pattern among his attacks showed that all 4 victims were strangers, walking alone between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. After observing the pattern of the killings, police patrols increased around the city, and a reward of $20,000 was announced for the apprehension of a suspect. However, it is believed that the River City Ripper is yet to be apprehended and still roams the street till date. Number 12. Shawn Grate. After a couple of unidentified killers, we finally have Shawn Grate to remind you that what we have here isn't a list of anonymous killers, but the deadliest serial killers in history. And ranking 12th on this list is Shawn Grate. Grate, like many others, had a disturbing childhood, as his mother left the family when he was 11. Grate would then experience depression as a teenager due to childhood neglect and emotional detachment. After high school, he broke into a house in Marion County with a juvenile accomplice to steal jewelry and money. He was given a charge and sentenced to 4 years in prison before being released 9 months later. A few years later, between 2006 and 2016, Grate had killed 5 individuals, including 2 of his ex-girlfriends and 3 other women in Ohio. He sent letters to a news station claiming he took the lives of his girlfriends for government assistance. On September 13, 2016, a victim of Grate's sexual assaults made a 911 call to Ashland police, eventually leading to Grate's arrest. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, and then not guilty by reason of insanity. However, he was proven sane after psychological assessments. In the long run, Grate pleaded guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to death. He is scheduled to be executed on March 19, 2025. Number 11. Dale Hauser and Samuel Dietman. You can consider the previous guys moderate when you compared him to how deadly a duo can be. Hauser and Dietman sit 11th on this list, having most of their crime activities in 15 months between May 2005 and August 2006, and largely influenced by methamphetamine. They would set objects on fire and commit drive-by shootings of random pedestrians and animals, mainly dogs and horses. Their crimes came to an end when a series of tips linked them to their crimes, with the most significant tip coming from Ron Horton, a friend of Dietman. On August 3, 2006, police arrested Hauser and Dietman outside their apartment in Mesa. Hauser was charged with 88 crimes in 5 different indictments attributed to the serial shooter investigation. He was convicted on 6 of 8 murders and 80 charges overall on March 13, 2009. 2 weeks later, he was sentenced to 6 death sentences. In July 2009, Dietman pleaded guilty to 2 murders and received a life sentence without parole. While Dietman was still serving his sentence, Hauser killed himself before his sentence by overdosing on an antidepressant in 2013. A week before his capture, Hauser interviewed former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson as part of his sports journalism job. When questioned by the police regarding his brief meeting with Hauser, Tyson described him as a small guy, but a nice guy. Number 10. Irael Keyes. And now we show you a total and complete criminal. More criminally versatile than anyone you've seen before. Keyes had many other titles and accomplishments aside from being a serial killer. He was an American bank robber, arsonist, kidnapper, and sex offender. Keyes was the second of 10 children born to a large family. As a result, the children were made to work on local farms and hunt their food to survive. Keyes grew up killing animals for fun. He hunted anything with a heartbeat and even admitted to skinning a deer alive. Though it is believed that Keyes killed his first victims between 1996 and 1997, his crime spanned 11 years, between 2001 and 2012. He enrolled in the military and was discharged after a few years. He did admit to raping 2 women during his time in the military. After his discharge, Keyes moved to Washington, then Alaska, where he started after a construction business. He admitted to committing 4 murders in Washington, 1 in New York, where he owned property, and 1 in Alaska. Following the killing of one of his victims, he was caught by authorities after demanding ransom money, and police were able to track withdrawals from his account as he moved throughout southwestern U.S. He was arrested in Texas on March 13, 2012, and later extradited to Alaska. He confessed to some of his crimes, including the murder that he was apprehended for. Keyes, before his trial, expressed his wish to be executed within a year. Shockingly, he killed himself 9 months later, on December 2, 2012, in his cell. Believed by many to be representations of his 11 victims, he left behind drawings of 11 skulls and a pentagram. His death kept many cases unclosed and many questions unanswered. Number 9. The Doodler. Just when you thought you saw it all, here's an artist and a criminal in one person. The Doodler was believed to be responsible between 6 and 16 killings and the assault of 3 surviving men in the early 70s. Like many unidentified serial killers, his nickname wasn't meaningless. It was given due to his habit of drawing his victims before stabbing them to death. He was also known as the Black Doodler. Between 1974 and 1975, he often met his victims, who were all white males, at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. Several of his victims were stabbed in the front and back of their bodies in similar locations. The suspect was described as a black man between 19 and 25 years, 6 feet tall, and with a slender build. Till date, the suspect remains unidentified and unapprehended. Number 8. Charles Tex Watson. More outrageous than any name you've seen so far is Charles Tex Watson. Watson was a central member of the Hansen family. The Hansen family wasn't one of those noble or affluent families you may want to think about, but a cult and gang led by Charles Manson. Despite a childhood of brilliance, piety, and sportsmanship, he ended up in a fraternity. And on August 9, 1969, Watson and 2 others murdered pregnant actress Sharon Tate and 4 others in Los Angeles. Alongside 6 members of the cult, he traveled to Los Feliz the next night and murdered Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Knowing that the cops were after him, he fled to Texas in October 1969. A month later, on November 30th, 1969, he was arrested and eventually extradited to California the following year. He was said to have refused talking and eating in California, losing 55 pounds and regressing to a catatonic state as a result. He spent a 90-day evaluation period at the hospital until he was deemed able to stand trial. He was convicted of 1 count of conspiracy to murder and the killings of 7 people and an unborn child. He was sentenced to death on October 21, 1971, but avoided execution when the California Supreme Court's People v. Anderson decision led to the invalidation of death sentences imposed in California before 1972. However, he has remained incarcerated ever since. Number 7. West Mesa Bone Collector. And here you have the worst and most secretive on the list so far, the West Mesa Bone Collector. This serial killer was so known as a result of the West Mesa murders between 2001 and 2005. News about this killer emerged on February 2nd, 2009, a Monday night where a woman walked her dog on the West Mesa of Albuquerque, New Mexico, United States. As they strolled, the dog stumbled on a bone, and after confirming the bone was human, the woman reported the situation to the police. Following the investigation, they discovered the remains of 11 females and a fetus buried in the area. Many of the victims were between 15 and 32 years of age and were mostly involved in drugs and sex work. It remains unanswerable if this killer is a person or a group of persons. What is, however, known is that the 11 discovered bodies were all buried by the same person or group of persons. Since the 2 main suspects weren't convicted, a reward of up to $100,000 was offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or group responsible. The reward remains uncollected till date, and the case, deemed as one of the largest crime cases in New Mexico, also remains unsolved till date. Number 6. Jeffrey Dahmer. Can you really imagine anyone worse than someone who single-handedly unsettled a whole community? Also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, the streets of Milwaukee, Wisconsin were restless for 13 long years because of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer. Though said to have killed and dismembered 17 males, he was only convicted of 15 of the 16 murders he committed in Wisconsin. Many questions were raised regarding his childhood, and while some claimed he lacked attention growing up, others believed he was doted on by both parents. However, he recollected that from an early age, he was unsure of the solidity of the family, owing to tensions and arguments between his parents in his early years. Typical of many future killers, Dahmer became interested in animals at an early age and became especially fascinated with animal bones. He began drinking beer and alcohol at age 14, frequently concealing his liquor inside the jacket he wore to school. On reaching puberty, Dahmer discovered he was gay and even conceived a plan to attack a male jogger he found attractive. After all, he wasn't lying about the tension between his parents, as they divorced in 1978, the same year he committed his first murder. 3 weeks after his graduation from high school, his first murder happened in his own house after the departure of his parents. He struck his victim with a dumbbell twice to render him unconscious and strangled him to death before masturbating over the corpse. The next few years were relatively silent, as he had unsuccessful stints at college and in the army, being discharged and dropped out mainly because of his persistent alcohol abuse. His murders continued in 1981, having initial contacts with his victims in or around gay bars. Following several crimes and killings, including an inappropriate sexual relations with a minor, he was apprehended on July 22, 1991, when one of his victims managed to escape his apartment and flagged a police officer down. Evidence of his criminal activities was found, and he was eventually charged with 15 killings. While his sanity was argued during the proceedings, it was decided that he could stand trial. He was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment in 1992 and a post-mortem 16th term. However, before he could complete anything close to that, he got a death sentence by beating from Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate. On November 28, 1994, Scarver beat him to death at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Number 5. Charles Nong and Leonard Lake. This time, you have a worse and more reckless duo that would go as far as killing a family member for possession. Born in Hong Kong, Nong moved to the US from Canada on student visa and met Lake in 1981 through a survivalist advertisement Lake placed. They met in 1980 and were of like minds. Lake invited Nong to share a cabin near Wilseyville, California, belonging to the family of Lake's ex-wife. He then built a dungeon next to the cabin, and by the next year, they would partner each other in committing devastating rapes, tortures, and murders. Prior to this, Lake had murdered his own brother and friend to steal their money and identities. Both men joined the Marine Corps and were discharged for various reasons. Lake was diagnosed with a schizoid personality disorder and was medically discharged in 1971 after a delusional breakdown in Vietnam. On the other hand, Nong stole weapons and was arrested by the military as a result. He was able to manage an escape, but their mobile home was raided and a large mass of weapons and explosives were seized. In the aftermath, they were both apprehended in 1982. Lake was released on bond, but he jumped bail, while Nong was sent back to the military, where he was dishonorably discharged in 1984 after 18 months of service in the military stockade at the U.S. Dispensary Barracks. They continued their crimes once they were out of custody. However, Nong's kleptomania led to his arrest in 1985 for stealing from a store in San Francisco while Lake waited for him in the car. As Nong and Lake were brought into questioning, Lake secretly swallowed a cyanide pill and died 4 days later. Nong, however, remains on death row till date. They are believed to have killed between 11 and 25 people. Number 4. Robert Hansen. Ranking 4th on this list is the lonely, revengeful, and evil alien, Robert Hansen. Expectedly, Hansen had the chronic disease of many serial killers, a troubled childhood, said to have suffered severe acne, a stutter, and a painful shyness. Hansen was vindictive, scarred, and lonely. He became an active serial killer in Alaska between 1972 and 1983. Also known as the Butcher Baker, Hansen had no less than 21 victims, excluding many other cases that were suspected to be linked to him. Before he began killing, he left his hometown of Iowa, joined the military, and was discharged after a year. Eventually, he opened a bakery in Alaska. Though he appeared innocent to his community, he would exhibit his dark side by preying on sex workers and dancers. His mode of operation was to bring the women to his home, rape them, set them loose in the Alaskan wilderness, and hunt them as if he hunted wild games before he shot or stabbed them. One victim was able to escape, handcuffed and barefoot. She was helped home, but got a discouraging response after reporting the case to the police, who felt Hansen was a beloved member of the community. Hansen, with the backup of a friend, denied such and was released. However, a profile of the killer was developed as the number of victims increased. The criminal was said to be an ardent hunter, a victim of low self-esteem, and the stutter, all perfectly fitting Hansen's person. A map, some firearms, and jewelry were found by the police after obtaining a warrant to search his home, plane, and car. star. On the map, there were 37 X marks, many of them matching the sites where the bodies of the victims have been found. He confessed to killing 17 women and was sentenced to 461 years in prison without parole in 1984. Hansen died at the age of 75 in August 21, 2014, due to natural causes from a lingering health condition. Number 3. The Zodiac Killer. Just when you thought you've exhausted your surprises, here, you have a man who doubled as a cryptographer and a serial killer. The Zodiac Killer was the culprit behind what has been described as the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. His case was an unsolved puzzle that over 2,500 suspects were investigated in a bid to unravel it. And his identity? That was a disturbing rhetorical question that even the FBI had no answer to. While his murders were committed in the areas of San Francisco and Napa Valley, he claimed to have killed 37 people, of which only 5 have been confirmed. Surprisingly, his victims were mainly young high school couples. Between December 1968 and October 1969, he attacked 7 people, including 3 young couples and a male cab driver. 5 of his victims died, while 2 survived the attack. Till date, there is no consensus as regards the number of his victims. He was infamous for sending cryptic messages and other details about his crimes. On August 1, 1969, he sent 3 letters to 3 newspapers and demanded that his letters be printed on the paper's front pages, else he would go on a killing spree. Each letter contained 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram, which he claimed contained his identity. While the cryptogram was cracked the next day, it contained a misspelt message, originally transliterated as, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all those I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." Another cryptogram of his wasn't solved until 2020, 51 years after it was produced. Of the many suspects investigated, late Arthur Lee Allen and late Gary Post were 2 prominent suspects many believed to have been the Zodiac Killer. Number 2. William Bonin. And now we move to the worst homosexual on the list, William Bonin, the man who molested even his own brother, known as the Freeway Strangler, because most of his victims' bodies were found along numerous freeways in Southern California. Bonin had a rough childhood, and one filled with petty criminal acts that led him to a juvenile detention center. Between May 1979 and June 1980, Bonin killed at least 21 men and boys, aside other cases of assault prior to that, mostly alongside 4 accomplices. His attraction for boys started and grew at a young age, molesting several young boys, including his younger brother in the process. But at the interest of his mother, who disagreed with his homosexuality, he got engaged to a woman, Linda. He was discharged from the military at the age of 21, after 2 years of service. On getting home, he discovered his fiancée took off to marry another man since the birth of their son. He then began kidnapping and raping young boys in his car, with his first victim said to have been 14 years old. After many more crimes, arrests, charged, and releases, his criminal behavior became worse. He promised the police that there'll be no more witnesses following his release in 1978, and from then on, he began killing his victims, murdering a minimum of 21 males and 15 others that did not have enough evidence. In 2 separate trials in 1982 and 1983, he was convicted and sentenced to death, spending 14 years on a death row before his execution by lethal injection in 1996, being the first inmate to die by this method. Number 1. Gary Ridgway. And to the worst of them all, the most evil person history will never want you to remember, Gary Ridgway. Prominent for being America's 2nd most prolific serial killer in history, Ridgway confessed to have committed his murders between 1982 and 1998, but was not apprehended until 2001. In this period, he admitted to killing 71 people. Most of his victims were said to be teenage sex workers and other women in vulnerable circumstances. Oftentimes, he strangled his victims by hand or by using ligatures. He then dumped their bodies in forested and overgrown areas in King County. Before his identity was known, he got the nickname the Green River Killer, after his first 5 victims were found in the Green River. Ridgway killed most victims in his home, truck, or a secluded area. They would engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, he would wrap his forearm around the front of their necks and pull back tightly with the other arm. He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and engage in necrophilia with their bodies. He was arrested as he was leaving the truck factory where he worked on November 30, 2001, after DNA linked him to 4 murders. In 2003, following a plea bargain to escape execution by disclosing the location of some murders, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences and an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, adding 480 years to his 48 sentences. Once the remains of his 49th victim were found, he was given another sentence. Today, he is 75 years old after spending over 2 decades in prison. If you've enjoyed watching this video and would love to get more content of this kind from us, kindly hit the like and subscribe button below.